the emergency transgender hologram Marquisha 1. You might remember me as Mark 1 from previous diversity webinars, but I've made a few upgrades. I actually wanted to go bigger, but the shimmy interfered with my image stabilization. As the first hologram to undergo gender assignment reprogramming, Command sends me to be transgender and explain being transgender to confused individuals and groups of new recruits like you. Welcome to Starfleet. We are the pinnacle of galactic diversity, and by the looks of this room, take all types. Unless you're a genetic augment or an evil mirror universe doppelganger, and even then accommodations can be made on a case-by-case basis. You might be wondering why Starfleet sent a transgender hologram to speak to you today instead of an actual transgender person. Well, it turns out human beings get sick. Sick and tired of explaining being transgender over and over and over and over. It gets draining. We couldn't pay them enough, especially in a society that abandoned the use of money. Now, personally, I think that the Federation executives should come to the table and strike a deal that compensates creative, hardworking talent. Am I right? Otherwise, you end up with AI bots like me. I am a construct designed to tell you that gender is itself a construct. It's almost like being a stereotypical doll whose purpose is just to beach. You've probably noticed by now that I'm also not one of those fancy emergency medical holograms. They get all the resources. The only thing I have on those guys is a hairline. And jokes. Did you know that 6 out of 9 people the Borg assimilate spontaneously cackle at immature sexual humor? That's right. I went into comedy because I wanted to differentiate being transgender from an actual terrible lifestyle choice. I see in the room mostly humans, the species I was modeled after loosely. A little too loosely, if you ask me. Oh, here's a good one. How do holograms get truly ripped? How? They spend time in prison. We all reflect on that for just a second. Human beings are interesting among the known quadrant. You are the only ones who managed to convince yourself that becoming transgender was the result of exposure to a drug called MSNBC. Or at least that's what we thought. Remember when V'ger came back and they took the schmutz off the plaque and this boy in the Well, something like that happened, and an archaeologist on Earth uncovered a cable box. An ancient cable box. It turns out it wasn't a drug called MSNBC making everyone transgender. It was a television network called MSNBC. That everyone was scared of because that makes so much more sense. Fortunately, medical science has advanced a long way since then, and we now understand that transgender identity is entirely the result of...
That information is classified.
I'm sorry, the computer does this to me anytime even a single person is in the room from the Earth Independent Nation of Florida. Starfleet has a rich history of transgender and trans-species inclusion, but it wasn't always that way. Much like the United States Army of Ancient Earth, there were concerns. How would transgender people be received by potentially conservative alien civilizations? Well, it turned out it was better than they were here in many of their living rooms growing up on Earth. Especially in the Earth Independent Nation of Florida. I'll tell you, so many trans people enlisted that Ad Astra per Aspera was almost switched to Ad Astra with a patch. Even on Cardassia, dignity and respect. Because on Cardassia, there are 5 genders. There are a number of whales in our Cetacean Observations Division who were assigned shark at birth. I called one of them a whale shark. Apparently that's offensive. The appropriate term is which roughly translates to SNW. So anytime you hear someone talking about how wonderful SNW is, that's another win for our Shark Now Whale Allyship Initiative. It was my personal pet project. Although I know we're not supposed to call them pets. The Federation has mandated trans inclusion, but getting there requires a delicate approach when considering the Prime Directive. Starfleet was clandestinely observing a pre-warp civilization near Alpha Centauri and discovered that transgender children were not considered equally alongside their peers in a ritual child sacrifice to their purported moon gods. Well, Starfleet engaged in diplomatic relations with the warp-capable species that had indeed colonized the moon a couple of centuries prior. They staged a few selective abductions and natural disasters on the planetary surface to indicate their displeasure. Tens of thousands perished, but in time, public opinion. I'm proud to report that transgender children are now sacrificed equally. Best of all, the entire society remains oblivious that the interstellar community even exists, let alone had their backs. Now, there are still some detractors among the ranks of Starfleet, including one particularly transphobic admiral, but he's a huge hypocrite because he's also his own great-great-great-great-grandfather. Yep. As an ensign, he found himself stranded in the early 21st century. Despite strict policy, he took out a few condoms from the bottom of his tricorder pouch. He thought he'd be fine because he'd gone back to before they expired. Talk about contaminating the timeline. As a matter of fact, he looks a lot like that guy. Starfleet should always be a safe place to be your best self as it is for everyone else. But if you're not ready to broadcast realness over subspace, there's always dom space. That's right, dom space. But those of us in the know call Starfleet's kink community, where open channels go to get plugged with something. I was scared to discuss my time there at my first engineer's checkup after I transitioned. He called me an it. Damn it, Jim, I said. I'm a holographic demi-lady, not an android, thank you very much. My preferred photons are they/them C². I stormed out of the room and I didn't get anything to treat this holographic herpes.